Welcome to our Relationship Tool series. I have invited again my friend Monique to talk about a wonderful foundational tool that I believe very few people know how to do well about boundary setting. Boundaries are essential, yet we are really poor in our relationships on expressing them, enforcing them, and co-creating a better relationship through them. So, Monique, tell us a little bit about this tool.
Yeah, most of us think of boundary setting as what the other person needs to do differently. And my jaw dropping moment was realizing it's what I need to do differently if their behavior doesn't change. And boundary setting is empowering when you realize that you're in control of changing the behavior in you.
Monique, what are the steps to learn to use this tool effectively in a couple?
Yeah, so step number one is identify what is and isn't working well for you and be as specific as possible. Number two is check your intention. If you realize that you're trying to get revenge or, make them feel small, check the video on cleaning your anger that we produced before. And when you describe the specific behavior, which is step three, that you want to address, make sure that you're as objective as possible, like the data a camera could record. And then step four, this is where your power is. Describe what you will do differently if that undesired behavior continues. Step five, really also important, is follow through with your boundary. You want to believe your word, you want them to believe your word, and you don't want to teach them how to test boundaries. You want to teach them how to respect boundaries.
Monique, some of the clients I work with are sometimes so reactive that they cannot even talk. Would those 5 steps still apply in those situations where basically they are frozen?
Yeah, the same five steps will still apply, but if you are really reactive or you're with a narcissistic partner, you probably want to start with working with a therapist or coach to understand the reactivity or the dynamic that might show narcissism, and then work on the boundary setting.
Okay, listeners, now my favorite part of these videos is role plays. Monique and I are going to do several role plays to highlight different parts of poor and good boundary setting. Um, every role play, we are going to do some commentary so that you better understand what went wrong, what we can do differently. And very importantly, Monique and I are colleagues. We are not a real couple. Monique, I've told you many times, do not interrupt me during the game. Are we clear?
Valdo, when you raise your voice to this level, I am going to walk out of the room and go for a walk, and then I will re enter this conversation when we're both more calm. So, viewers, in this example, Valdo's voice escalated to what we might call yelling. I realize this is not going to be a productive conversation. So I say, I am going to leave. We can both calm down. I'm going to come back, which reassures him that I'm not just walking out. And then we can have a productive conversation from a calmer state.
Monique, thank you for that wonderful example. From hearing clients and from all the movies I'm watching, this is a very classic, widespread, prevalent example. And I'm so glad that you spoke up. One thing I wish you had done more is to speak up for you, that this is past your boundary more than you had spoke up for the relationship.
Yes, that's a great point because if you want a healthy relationship, you need healthy boundaries, which means you need healthy people. And ultimately, it's for me that I'm setting a boundary and for the relationship.
In this first role play, we showed a highly reactive situation. We are now going to do a similar role play with a much more level headed situation. Monique, I just received another overdraft notice from the bank. Some of those overdrafts I'm guilty. I want to make sure that you and I as a couple do not keep incurring those. So I'm going to set up a new account in which we can only spend what is on the account.
I think that's a good idea and probably a good start to lots of conversations we might want to have about money and our goals.
Monique and I are now going to do 3 scenarios in which I touch Monique and Monique expresses a boundary in 3 very different ways. Scenario 1, we call that porcupine. Viewers, just visualize that right now I'm touching Monique.
Valdo, don't touch me here.
You see why we call that the porcupine reaction.
Yeah. And in that scenario, clearly I'm in a really reactive state. This would be what we were talking about earlier. I probably need to talk to my therapist or my coach and unpack what's going on for me before I can even think about setting a healthy boundary.
Viewers, I am now going to touch Monique again in the same place on her shoulder.
Although when you touch me here, I just kind of freeze.
My love, I am so glad you're telling me, and this is very much a tribute to all the work you're doing with your therapist to grow yourself, to basically overcome all your traumas. And it's also an honor to our relationship where you and I basically are learning to be in with each other in a way that we basically trigger each other less and less.
Yeah, I'm proud of myself for speaking up. Thanks for noticing it.
For some of you that have deep reactivity issues, you likely know that this can be years in the making to uncover our deep trauma, our deep complex PTSD issues, and slowly but surely learn to change the way we act in the world. And learning that together as a couple is one of the best ways of rewiring our brains, of creating new neural pathways.
And the beautiful thing about unpacking this together is one of the learnings is Valdo not taking it personally as I'm doing my work to not be reactive.
Viewers, in this third touch role play, visualize that I'm touching Monique sexually.
Valdo, when you touch me there, I feel a sudden drop in my sexual desire and I stop participating in moving our sexual play forward.
Monique, I'm so glad you spoke up. You and I have talked about that a number of times, about that boundary you have. And this is very much on me to learn to be more connected and playful with you while I do more foreplay. And so I have the impression here that you spoke up soon enough and you would be willing, wanting me to do a take 2.
That sounds like a great plan.
Wonderful. So listeners, take 1, 2, 3. Here is a link. It is a game Monique and I recorded a few months ago that is wonderful when you're not happy with the way you acted and you want to offer your partner a take 2 or a take 3 or another take as a way of starting again from a much better and much more collaborative footing. I want to celebrate your growth because, very frankly, being with a doormat was no fun.
Yeah, I learned how to speak up, not be reactive, and instead of having years of disconnection and abrupt end making, we ended up with take 2.
And now our Q&A. Monique, first question.
Yeah, and it's an important one. If I set a boundary, what if I'm afraid my partner will escalate?
That is a really good question. And the first and foremost is if you do not feel safe, make sure that you call 911 or DVSAS. Escalation in itself is not necessarily a problem. Every couple at some point escalates. And so there is a big difference between couples who say, oh shit, I just escalated, let's learn to basically better relate with each other. This is what I call green light. And then there is also couples who say, okay, I escalated or he escalated or she escalated, but somehow my marriage is salvageable, but we have to do some work on it, and that's yellow light. And there is also couples in which we say, well, there is no hope here. Let's find a way out. Red light. Really good question. I set a boundary as you recommended, but I did not follow through on my consequence.
Yeah, and often what we'll find is the harder it is to set and keep a boundary, the more important the boundary is. So, step one is take a look at that. Is this a really important boundary for you? And will you need more support? The other is it can be really helpful to focus on, are you trying to teach them to test boundaries or to respect boundaries? Sometimes that can help you with your follow through.
Many of us have either nice guy or doormat issues, and learning to enforce and follow through on stated consequences is part of the process.
Do I really need to set a boundary when it's obvious the behavior is such a problem?
Absolutely. And first, some people have narcissistic or borderline personality disorder, and they somehow intentionally trespass boundaries. And so setting boundaries is a really good step in learning to enforce them. And then setting boundaries is basically learning, training your partner to better relate with you. And very often, poorly set expectations result in complaining. So even if one or two, I mentioned earlier, don't work, at minimum is you will learn to better relate with your partner without complaints or with less complaints. Does boundary setting get easier as you practice it?
Yes, it gets easier because you start to realize how empowering and energizing it is to see what you need, say what you need, and stand for what you need. It absolutely gets easier.
I found out that my wife is having an affair. I have not confronted her yet.
Yeah, so sometimes when we don't confront somebody, it's because we're not ready. It might be because you need to get information or resources before you confront her. It's also important in this stage to remember that by not confronting her, you're colluding with her. So the idea here is to focus not on her behavior, but on what you're going to do when you confront her to hold her accountable, that you're empowered. So what you're going to do, not what she's going to do if she continues the affair.
I'm struggling applying this tool with my partner. They say I'm blaming them more than I used to.
Yeah, so probably instead of boundary setting, what you're doing is doing punishments, which is probably making them responsible for the experiences and issues you're having. It's probably kind of blaming and shaming them instead of addressing the behaviors. So let's remember that boundary setting is what you're going to do if their behavior continues, and making sure that you hold a space to listen to the feedback they give you when you're doing your boundary setting.
I love it, Monique. And in communication, the words themselves are a very small part of the communication. The tone of voice is very important, and also our body language. It is possible that you are no longer intending to blame and shame your partner, but you may express yourself in a way that sounds like it. And so I did a video a few months ago in our emotional intelligence series on harsh starts, in which basically a partner starts very loud and quickly, and it sounds like blame. And it is very possible that you have learned to not blame, but you still have that habit. So do watch that video. I find it hard to set boundaries.
Yeah, so you're probably conflicted about or unaware of or suppressing your needs and emotions. So, what you're going to want to do is really stop and figure out what's going on for you and how can you, instead of focusing on their behavior, focusing on your behavior and how it might even be enabling their behavior. So, if I set a boundary, is it forever?
That's a really good question. So, traffic light wisdom, sometimes red light is a boundary forever and you have to keep enforcing it. Sometimes yellow light, this is something that you have to work through and you have to reinforce that boundary a number of times, and then it could be months, maybe years, and then there is no more need. And sometimes green light, you just state that boundary and your partner says, oh shit, I'm so sorry. Won't happen again. What if my partner does not respect my boundaries?
Yeah, eventually what will probably happen is that the pain of leaving them will become less than the pain of living with them. And you'll realize that there's something beautiful about the red light of traffic wisdom, right? I now have the clarity that I need to end this relationship. And by doing that, I make space for a green light relationship where I am not forever defending boundaries.
If this video inspired you to liberate more love in your relationship, or as Monique hinted, red light, to end your current relationship to create a new one in which you will be able to liberate more love, please hit the like button below and subscribe so you can be notified when I publish new juicy content. And please share with all you believe would benefit, even if it feels uncomfortable. I look forward to seeing you very soon.